Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Gatto, and I am the chairman of the newly created California State Assembly Committee on Consumer Protection and Privacy. We are streaming live on calchannel.com and taking questions live on Reddit. You can begin submitting your questions at the following URL. It is tinyurl.com/privacy224. And I will repeat that again in a couple minutes. So for those of you who are watching who are unfamiliar with government, the California State Assembly is the lower house in the state of California. You can think of us as the House of Representatives without the gridlock, except just for the state of California. And a committee, like this committee, is a place where legislative proposals of a certain subject matter go to be analyzed and voted on before being voted on by the legislature as a whole. Now, later in the year, a typical committee hearing will hear and vote on actual bills. But at this time of year, some committees choose to do oversight or informational hearings. Now, this is the latter with a big difference. So typically people who wish to ask questions or present opinions at a hearing like this would have to travel to Sacramento at significant expense, get dressed up in their Sunday best, and wait in line to speak, usually for less than a minute. Well, today we modernize and improve that process to make this legislature more accessible. This is a statewide webcast town hall where you can ask or tell the members of this committee anything, and we will do our best to answer. And you can do so from the comfort of your home for free, wearing whatever you choose. This committee belongs to consumers, and it regulates technology. We wanted to make sure that we involve both in our first hearing. So let's briefly go over the ground rules because there really are very few. Again, this is both a textual and broadcasted town hall. I will be updating the Reddit feed live I will not be updating the Reddit feed live with answers because I can't type that fast. But instead, your question will be answered the old-fashioned way, which is verbally, by the members of this committee. So you'll need to keep watching this feed to watch your question being answered by the panel. And again, you can submit your questions at tinyurl.com/privacy224. That's tinyurl.com/privacy224. We're asking, but not telling, anybody who wants to submit a question to just state your name and what community you're from, like this is Jane from Visalia. But again, that's optional. We want to have as much freedom as possible on the Reddit feed. As for your questions, we will, of course, give priority to specific ones within our jurisdiction, which is privacy and consumer protection. Now, this, of course, doesn't mean we don't have a sense of humor. If you want to ask me questions about which hair gel I use, or if you want to ask Mr. Gordon whether he prefers boxers or briefs, then have at it. But I think all of us agree government could probably use a little more humor. Now I'm going to briefly introduce the panel, and then we will get right into your questions. So first over there we have Evan Lowe, who represents the Cupertino area and my favorite town of Los Gatos. Next we have Ling Chang, who represents Diamond Bar and portions of Los Angeles and Orange County. Next to her, we have Catherine Baker, who represents the East Bay. To my right, we have Mr. Jim Cooper from the Sacramento area. Next to him is Matt DeBobne from the San Fernando Valley. Mr. Rich Gordon from Palo Alto and the surrounding areas. We have Mr. Brian Dally from the northeastern extremities of the state, Redding, communities like that. And of course, Ed Chow representing the San Gabriel Valley. Now, you will notice I did not mention the political parties of any member because privacy should not be a partisan issue. Lastly, I'm going to introduce the committee's excellent vice chair. This is Mr. Scott Wilk of Santa Clarita for some brief remarks, and then we will get right into your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. jurisdiction of this committee is going to grow. And I think all members of this committee feel the weight of the precedent-setting decisions that we'll be asked to make. Finally, I challenge each of us on this committee to find the discipline and the discernment to know when government should intervene legislatively to ensure privacy and when to allow the private sector to lead. Again, I want to thank in advance the chair and all the committee members for their efforts to protect privacy rights for all Californians. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. So we're going to go right into the questions, and we will open this one up for the committee as a whole, and anybody feel free to dive right in. So we have a question from SoCal Advocate, and this person says, this committee looks to be politically pretty diverse. What are the sorts of things that both conservatives and liberals can agree on when it comes to privacy issues? So who wants to take our first question? Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this committee will be a very bipartisan committee. I think that most Californians and, quite frankly, most Americans love private property rights. And with that, I mean, I think that's one of the things that founded America. And part of that, like private property, is your personal information and how and who uses that information. So I think that those are some areas that this committee will possibly take a look at through the course of this next legislative cycle.
Excellent. Does anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I want to hop in real quick. I had initial concerns when I heard about this committee was being formed, because our side of the aisle was not informed that it was moving forward. But when I heard that, Mr. Gatto, that you were going to be, chairing this committee, and I saw what thoughtful members are on this committee, I believe that we are all going to do our best to put forth what's best for all Californians. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to serve here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to address that question? Mr. Lowe.
Yeah, as you well know, I also represent Silicon Valley along with Mr. Gordon, but I think particularly the regions of the innovation economy and how we can work together collaboratively in partnership to address many of these issues. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, does not cross party lines. It's not a one-party issue, and certainly the economic vitality of these regions are very important, and I know that we all collectively want to look out for the interests of the entire state, but again, in terms of partnership, in collaboration.
Terrific. All right, so let's go to our next question. Our next question comes from Reed Milburn, and she says, we're excited to see the formation of this committee. Do some of you want to highlight some of the issues that this committee will tackle this year? And, of course, anybody on the panel, this can be a bill that you have. You can talk about one of the bills you have, or perhaps a bill that you'd like this committee to tackle, or just go over some of the jurisdiction. And I'll start this just by answering what we have seen referred to us so far. So there's a number of things that are very much on people's minds. I think data breaches are very high on that list. People have seen that it seems to be it's not just a matter of if out there, it really is a matter of when. So many big companies have been targeted by hackers and data thieves. So I think we're going to deal with those issues of breach and encryption and matters like that. Also, people have been very concerned about their personal privacy and their personal space. This is the issue, of course, of drones and whether someone can invade your space with some of the new gadgets that exist out there that make it so easy to invade people's space. People have talked with us a great deal about how technology is changing the world of consumer protection. This is everything from the sharing economy, from ride-sharing bills, home sharing applications, and matters like that. So those are just some of the bills so far that have been referred to this committee, and we think that there's a lot of them in the general umbrella of privacy and consumer protection that will come before this committee and that members of this committee will author. Mr. Dababneh.
So I was excited recently to have two of my bills referred to this committee. The first one is a digital driver's license. We'll authorize the DMV to create an app to allow residents of our state, at their choice, to supplement their traditional driver's license with a digital form. We've already seen this with a number of our tech companies going that direction with Apple Pay and Google Wallet. We've already seen this with a number of kind of other things we use on a daily basis in terms of your boarding ticket, in terms of proving identification other ways online. We think this will have great implications for e-commerce to provide people with another form of identity. So we're working very closely with the Lieutenant Governor on this, who's one of the sponsors of the bill, and we'll be working with everyone on this committee. It's already a bipartisan bill. We have a number of Republicans already co-authoring it, so I'm excited about that bill coming before this committee to have hearings. And also, often we ask the business, the tech world, to be accountable, to have protocols in place if there are data breaches, and to make sure that they're working to ensure that their customers, our constituents, are given a certain kind of respect and treatment after the fact to make sure they're made whole. I think that the government should hold those standards for themselves. So I've also authored a bill that we put forward that will make sure that government agencies, if they have data breaches, have to hold themselves to those same high standards and provide credit check, subscriptions, provide other type of upfront information to our constituents and the consumers of those government agencies to make sure that when the government is in a process of dealing with a data breach, they have to hold themselves to the same standards that we expect the private industry to do.
Wonderful. So let's see. We have another question here, and this comes from Poidagai, and it says that a recent Washington Post article, among other news, has reported on the use of Stingray cell phone interceptor technology by police agencies. Aside from individuals under investigation, certain information from other cell phones in the vicinity is also collected. In theory, that information is not retained. What proof do we have that it is not, and what consequences are there if a law enforcement agency does it? And of course, this question is one of many that I'm seeing on here that deals with the government to individual privacy realm. Someone told me recently that almost all these issues, of course, can be lumped into three broad categories. How government treats the privacy of its citizens, how corporations treat the privacy of their customers, and then there's, of course, citizen-to-citizen privacy issues. And it was that gentleman's opinion that we do pretty good in the government, we do pretty well to regulate citizen-to-citizen privacy issues, but that we could do a lot more with the government-to-citizen privacy issues, and that's another issue that I think we will take on this year. So Stingray technology, does anyone wish to weigh in?
Sure, I'll weigh in.
Mr. Cooper.
Sure. Stingray is an effective tool. It can be open to it for abuse, but in law enforcement situations, say a missing person in Amber Alert, someone's been kidnapped, it gives law enforcement the ability to track that cell phone to a certain location. It's been used in a number of circumstances throughout the state of California, the nation, to actually help recover victims that would have ended up dead. So it's an effective tool. Like any tool, it can be abused. So you don't want to throw out the bathwater with the baby.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question here that seems like a general philosophical question, and it has to do with the California Constitution, and it comes from American Girl 03. And it says, California's Constitution says that I have a right to my privacy, or a right to privacy. If so, shouldn't I own the information about myself? How will you make sure that the information on my cell phone and from other devices isn't collected and shared or sold without me knowing about it and consenting to it? Does anybody wish to weigh in on that? I guess the chair gets all the questions that no one wants to answer. Well, I mean, I've signed up for a lot of websites in my time, and when you log in or when you sign up, there's often that disclosure in 8-point font that you have to click accept to before you can become a member of that website. So technically, these websites are obtaining consent. I'm not sure if it's buried in those terms of service because, frankly, I don't think too many people read them. Whether the information is shared or sold without people knowing about it or consenting to it. Chances are it probably is in that terms of service somewhere that you are signing away your firstborn child, among other things, in those terms of service. But I do think we do need stronger laws and protections in general to make sure that people are aware if sensitive data is being shared or sold. By sensitive data, I mean, things about your location, which could be used for stalking, things about, your finances, which of course could be used for fraud, and other matters like that. And I do expect this committee will target or will tackle those issues this year. Ms. Baker.
First, I want to thank you for coming up with this very innovative way to do a hearing. It's terrific that we are embracing technology and we're not requiring constituents around the state to have to schlep to Sacramento to be heard on this issue. So I applaud you and the Vice Chair for putting this committee together and this hearing. On this point, it just raises some of the issues that we're going to have to be thinking of, which is when do we opt in and when do we opt out with certain privacy policies? When is something automatic and maybe pushed on us, and when do we have to actually request it? So that is a valid issue that I know we'll surely have a chance to listen to. And also, we're going to be looking at when data that's out there will be attached to your name or your address or otherwise. There are times when data may be available and to medical advancements, for example, and knowing about someone's medical background without their medical background being tied to their name or address. It's anonymous, essentially. So I think Vice Chairman Wilk actually touched on something in his opening comments, and that is how do we protect privacy without stifling innovation and the economy. So that's a balance we're going to have to reach. But those are some examples, going to the questioner's point, of what we need to explore this year. What we will be empowered about and what about data that's there can be kept anonymous to protect our privacy. And I look forward to that debate.
Thank you. Mr. Chow.
I also like to thank you, Mr. Chair, for hosting this, convening this very innovative hearing. And I about a year ago, I authored and legislation AB 242, which actually addresses the issue of privacy policy. And I fully am in concurrence with what you said about privacy policies, in that many of these policies are actually buried in very long and legalese. And in fact, many of these policies are 30 pages, 40 pages long, and that never get read by anybody. So, and within all these language, there's always something that talks about how your data is being handled. And my bill was to basically to make it so that these policies are more readable and understandable. So I totally am in agreement with what you said about privacy policies, and that they're being too long and we need to fix it.
Thank you. So that brings us to the next question, which is sort of related, which is what consequences exist in current law for a company failing to abide by its own terms of service, particularly in relation to data retention and deletion. And I think that comes up if there is one of these lengthy terms of service or privacy policies or forms that a consumer completes before they use a website. What are the consequences if a company fails to abide by them? And I'll open that up to the panel because I must admit I do not know.
Mr. Chair, I think there are different cases. Obviously, if it's a computer breach, that's different versus an employee stealing information. That's happened in a number of cases. So to me, it's on a case-by-case basis what the culpability is of that organization. So.
And that is one of the issues that, of course, we expect that we will wrestle with quite a bit is what is the right balance for enforcing these laws? Of course, law enforcement is burdened with a lot of different things. Clearly, I think just from being real-world pragmatists, we know that law enforcement often focuses, and probably rightfully so, on the traditional hard crimes. Crimes that involve, serious bodily injury or something like that. But these breaches are not victimless crimes. People in many cases will see their finances hurt or something very, very detrimental to their existence. And law enforcement does not always have the resources or the time or the manpower, people power, to follow up on these. And then so the question is, do we allow for private lawsuits? Will private lawsuits be something that marks a lot of these proposals? And that's I think the balancing act that we have to walk within this committee. We don't want to subject anybody to unnecessary litigation, but we also want to make sure that these things can be enforced. Mr. Chow, you had something else? Oh, no? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Let's go to our next question. Well, somebody asked, SK Bonnet 76 asked if the NSA was monitoring this Reddit. The answer is probably yes. Okay.
I have a comment on that, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So last year I went down to Silicon Valley on a Thursday afternoon after we got out of session, again, to meet with various companies, because I used to serve on the Arts and Entertainment Committee, and Internet media falls under their jurisdiction. I left my wallet on my bureau here in Sacramento, so when I went to the airport, I had no wallet, and I wanted to get on a plane to go home to Burbank. See, if I had a digital license, I would be good, which is why I'm co-authoring your bill. But having said that, so, I call Rules Committee calls Homeland Security, and so they ask, my name, my social security number, and then they set me in a room, And then 10 minutes later, an officer comes in, and he gets a phone, and he dials the number, he picks it up, and then he starts asking me questions. So this is the government. They asked me questions about myself that I did not know the answer to. I mean, like, one of them, name your next door neighbors. I'm going, dude, I live in California. No one knows their neighbors. I mean, but it was on one hand, I felt secure that, they know a lot, so to protect us. But on the other hand, there was like stuff, seriously, I don't think you need to know that. So, and that's government. But that's why this committee, I think, is going to be really fascinating.
Yes, they do know a lot. Okay, so we have a question from someone who clearly values his or her privacy. It's under the handle Fakey McFakename. This person asks, Dear Assemblymember Gatto et al., California currently has a statute that criminalizes recording a conversation without the consent of both parties, and this is Penal Code Section 632. While that generally sounds like a good idea, it's been applied to threaten people who are recording public officials performing their duties, including investigative journalists and consumers recording harassing phone calls from debt collectors. Have you guys thought about amending the law to create a public interest defense? This is one that a new topic. I'm not sure that this has come up in the legislature, so I'll open it up to the committee. Mr. Gordon.
Yeah, the fascinating question, and I think it, as you said, is something that we've not discussed here. That it's something that could certainly be put on the table, and I think it also reminds me that some of these issues are overlap with other committee jurisdictions. We have a committee on the judiciary that would be very interested in joining us in a discussion of that topic. And so I think that one of the dynamics that Californians can look for as this committee does its work is that oftentimes the issue of our privacy and consumer protection links with some of the other elements of the way we look at legislation. So there will be, I think, some interesting challenges as we work both in this committee but with other committees of jurisdiction to resolve some of these problems.
Yeah, and that's something that that has been asked before in a much more narrow context than Mr. McFakename asked it of me, which really has to do with so-called citizen journalists or people who are just monitoring the activities of government with cell phones, which obviously are ubiquitous nowadays. And I do think by and large, we could use some additional protections to make sure that people who are monitoring that type of thing, have the right to do that. Mr. DeBonne.
I agree with the chair's remarks there, but I also would say that when we're looking at this committee, I think we're looking for more transparency, more protection for consumers, and more protection for privacy. And I think that's a very slippery slope when you start talking about allowing a broader definition of what's allowed. Obviously, law enforcement has the ability to get warrants for wiretaps. Journalists have certain protections. When you start talking about the ability for recording people without their knowledge, I think it's a very slippery slope, especially with the way technology is, especially with the type of technology we have that's so invasive already. I think that we should be very cautious when we're starting to look at opening up more room for that type of surveillance.
Great. Yes, Mr. Cooper.
And I think the reason it was made a felony was to deter folks from doing these type of recordings. Obviously, depending on which interests they have. So there are cases, someone's being threatened. There are different circumstances where they won't be prosecuted, but for most folks, they're recording for, their own purposes. So it was implemented for a reason.
All right. We have another question here. This comes from Lindsay, California. She asked, with emerging pay-by-the-mile car insurance options that require onboard diagnostic devices, what's in place to protect a consumer's driving behavior data from being used against them? And I'll start that off by saying, again, we talked about the three different categories of laws that affect privacy and the three different relationships. There's obviously one type of relationship which is your insurance company with the consumer. That is a corporation to a consumer relationship, and that of course is something that can be affected by a contract. And there's lots of people who might want to sign up and say, you know what, I don't accelerate fast, I don't brake quickly, I don't drive too many miles, and I'm more than happy to have my insurance company place a little device in my car that confirms that so that I can get a break on my auto insurance. A whole other category, of course, would be the government monitoring that, which, of course, is the first category we talked about, which is the relationship of government and how it treats its citizens in terms of privacy. And then, of course, the third category, which we mentioned, is the citizen-to-citizen privacy issue. And that is, what if someone hacks into your automotive data and finds out where you have been and how fast you drive and all of these things, which I'm sure a lot of people just think should rightfully be private. We do intend tomorrow. I will announce a bill that deals with this. We do intend to try to take some measures to protect that type of data this year. Clearly, when you really run a risk, there was an article on a technical website that claimed that these car onboard diagnostic systems can be hacked, and that someone can do things like disable your brakes or make your horn honk or do things that would distract you from driving and perhaps cause an accident. So I think we do need to consider, as cars basically become mobile computers, what we are doing to protect that privacy, both from the government and from citizens who wish to cause mischief for their fellow citizens. All right. Let's see. So, we have our first question about breaches, and that is, what measures are being taken to ensure that consumers' information is kept more secure and that we avoid another data breach like the ones last year? And there were several last year. So who wants to talk about data breaches? Mr. Chow.
Yeah, I don't think there's one solution, one perfect solution that would resolve some of these issues. And I think when it comes to data breaches, we are going to see more of these data breaches. Now, the analogies that I like to use is the fact that you can put a lot of locks on your home, but yet the thieves will still try to come in. Having said that, I think there are several things or measures that we could take to alleviate or to mitigate some of these potential exposure or consequences or losses. One of which is the fact that we could minimize the amount of data that we collect from consumers, for example, and the analogy that I gave earlier is that, if you put less money in your home, the thief will have little less incentive to break into it. Obviously, your loss will be mitigated a little bit. Also, now, the other way that we could mitigate some of these damages would be to provide technology, for example, encryption. I think, Mr. Chair, you mentioned about encryption earlier, and that's one of the other ways that we could try to basically protect the data. Once the data enters into that information superhighway, we could actually put some measures to protect this data. Now, obviously, that issue has been discussed time and again, whether we should provide for encryption, number one, and number two, if we do provide for encryption, what kind of encryption are we going to do? Let's say end-to-end. There are several other ways of encrypting information. And we should also think about things like providing a notice. For example, let's say if a breach occurs, then we should notify the consumer right away or at the earliest convenience. So those are some of the things that we should think about. And I think one of the members also mentioned about opt-in, opt-out. I think consumers ought to be informed about the kind of information that's being collected from them, and also the fact that they should have the option of have the information deleted when the information is not needed anymore. So a combination of those things would probably help a little bit to alleviate the problem. I think we're going to continue to see a lot of these breaches.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have our first question on drones, and this comes from Laxidep, and he or she asks specifically about a drone bill that was introduced in the other house by Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, but I think there are, by my count, at least 4 to 5, maybe 6 drone bills that have been introduced this legislative session. And again, some of them regulate the use of drones by private parties. This is the citizen-to-citizen paradigm, and some of them regulate or seek to regulate the use of drones by government. So this question is about a specific bill, which I think will come to the committee, so perhaps people don't want to weigh in on that yet because we haven't seen it. But there's a more general question, which is, what do you think is the best way to address the current drone problem? And this is from Jacob in Ventura County. We don't have a representative from Ventura County on the. I'm sure that person would be jumping to answer it. But, oh, you do have some of Ventura. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Wilk has some of Ventura County. So.
And I have a drone maker that's in my district.
Well, there you go.
drones are coming, and there's a lot of applications that are going to benefit people. I personally would like to see a national framework that we work within. So a lot of these issues, to me, I think we need guiding principles and not necessarily being very prescriptive on what people can and can't do. I myself used to work for a member of Congress who was on Armed Services Committee. I've been to see a drone test, and it's pretty incredible what they can do. And I certainly have privacy concerns because they definitely can invade your privacy, but they are coming, and I think we need to be smart on how we address that.